Welcome to Surviving the Dream with your hosts, Casey Arnold
and David Conley.
We're here to talk to people who seem to have their dream job and find out, what did it take? Is it what they imagined? Is it worth it? How do they do it?
Join us as we uncover the secrets of surviving the dream.
Hello, Casey.
Hi, Dave.
Here we are, surviving the dream. So I've brought on a real survivor today because he's a Manchester United fan, and my God, they need to survive it right now. But you probably know nothing about that.
I love when you start with sports. It's the thing I know the most about.
Well, I'm just saying he might not want to go there because they're struggling right now, but we might go there. But this guy is an artist manager for musicians, and he's from the same country as me. So there's two things going against him right now. It's a one and only Tim Vigon. How are you, Tim?
Not too bad. I just returned from the motherland.
From the motherland, yeah?
Yeah. So
how was it? Was it raining?
It was rainy and cold, but somebody else said that to me, and it was like when I got there, the first morning, I arrived the morning of Tottenham versus Man United.
Deliberately. Oh, it's my team. I'm a Tottenham fan,
so I could go. I wanted to go to the new stadium.
Yeah,
and I obviously tried to fit in as many United matches as I can when I go there. I've been going to Old Trafford for 40 years. So the surviving part, I've survived the ups and downs of Manchester United. So that bit, yeah, I'm all good with.
You got that down. Well, it could be worse. You could be a Tottenham fan like me, and they never win anything. So you've had your glory days.
Well, listen, it's about much more than that. It's a culture. But what I will say is that I arrived and it was shockingly cold. But I bought the greatest thing that I've ever bought, which is a heated gilet.
What?
Have you ever seen this? It's unbelievable. It's like a body warmer,
yeah,
but it's got like a normal power bank battery,
yeah,
in the pocket, and you switch it on, and it heats you up. So even no matter how badly we were playing,
yeah,
I was in a cocoon of warmth. So
you must have been the only man smiling in Old Trafford.
I was definitely looking far more blissful than most of my compatriots. I will say that. But 50 quid.
50 quid. We should market that. I tell you, next time I'm going to England and I know I've got a miserable time standing out on the terraces, I'm going to get one of those.
Anyone who wants to go to football in winter, I'm like, if you don't buy one of these, you're nuts.
God, aren't you like a little disappointed if you go back and the weather is like sunshiny and the birds are chirping, like you're missing a little piece of it?
No, do you know what? The UK is at its most magnificent when the sun is shining, but the wind is still crisp.
Oh, so yeah.
Which you don't get in LA. When the sun's shining, it's just kind of warm.
Yeah,
and I think it's really something that's quite unique to, especially London. But also, what's interesting is, within 3 days, you're back. I grew up there, so it didn't feel weird to be cold or rainy or any of that. Within 3 days, I was right back into the flow of things. And in fact, it's weirder being back here and it being warm all the time and readjusting to that. But I do it quite a lot because most of my work is in the UK. In fact, all of it is now. So I'm back and forth there quite a lot. So it's kind of a strange double life.
So how do you justify living in sunny Los Angeles where everyone's happy and all your work is in the UK?
Well, it's not easy. And originally, I mean, it's a long and winding story, really. Which kind of feeds into the whole survival of all of this. I quit the music business actually in 2010 when I decided to move here because my wife is from here and we originally were going to start a family here. But a very, very long story short, we ended up adopting our niece, who's now my daughter, obviously. And so I had to take a job back in music. which I had tried to escape, and now I'm unfortunately trapped forever. So,
so you basically, I'm sorry you got forced into what some people would consider a dream job. That's just how, because tell us what you do. I mean, whenever I've spoken to you, you've always telling me about these bands. And I'm going, oh my God, you're hanging out with Duran Duran and Dexy Midnight Runners. And you go, yeah.
It's way less glamorous than it sounds. I mean,
you're saying that Simon Le Bon's farts don't smell of lavender.
Well, I started when I was like 16 or 17. I was following bands around. I grew up in a really golden era in Manchester.
Was it the Hacienda? Was a Hacienda?
It was. The Hacienda was where we would go every Thursday and often on a Friday or Saturday. And but the music scene itself was thriving. There were seemed to be everybody was in a band.
Yeah.
You know, it was the Stone Roses, the Happy Mondays.
So Factory Records, that was all happening then, right?
Factory Factory ruled Manchester. And in fact, when you, obviously, Tony Wilson, who owned Factory Records, also Factory owned the Hacienda. And as you walked into the Hacienda, there was an enormous picture of Wilson that you had to walk past to go past. And he was definitely an inspiration growing up because, you know, there was a late night TV show because he was also a broadcaster.
Yeah. It's a great movie, isn't it? 24-Hour Party People.
24-Hour Party People's a great movie about him and about his influence on the scene. But when you were growing up there, and especially because I was at sixth form college there at the time, so sort of 16, 17, 18, you're really going through your changes and your discoveries. And I think that's the most potent time when you're really taking in music, and it soundtracks some of the most significant moments of your life, your first loves, your first shows, your sort of, you know, as you near adulthood and start doing things without your parents. And, you know, my first few shows were things like going to see New Order and
what an awesome time to be there.
Yeah, I remember going there and Mick Hucknall just jumped on the stage and he was in his pomp with Simply Red, and I'm like, oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the worst nights in Hacienda history, probably. People, you know, Madonna's first ever UK performance was at the Hacienda. But I saw so many people play there, and it was a sort of incredible time to grow up in that city because it definitely had an attitude of just do it, whatever it is that you are wanting to do, just do it. And I was into music and football. I was going to United every week, home and away, but I was going to clubs every night, and the clubs I was going to. Definitely, it was crossover stuff between kind of alternative music, you know, which would be things from, obviously there was still the Smiths, New Order, things like The Cure were hanging over, but also dance music was coming in. But specifically for me, I followed around bands like the Stone Roses and the Mondays and New Order, and I started doing a fanzine about the Stone Roses, which I guess is the equivalent to doing a blog now, right? And it just happened, right place, right time. It's awful fanzine, embarrassing, but it was pure enthusiasm, and I think that if anything, that I would say is everything that has come to me in my career has come as a result of enthusiasm. Is just being an enthusiast who kind of fluked their way into various places. So I the fanzine that I wrote actually did pretty well because the band exploded at the same time, and so suddenly people were kind of aware of me in London, like, you know, journalists and people around the sort of Manchester scene. And I think people could recognize that I wasn't necessarily very knowledgeable at the time. I wasn't really I wasn't cool, and I wasn't like, I didn't have friends or relatives in the scene. Or I was from a small town just outside Manchester, and really, so I was a little bit that little bit behind.
Which town were you from? Outside
from Macclesfield, it was called.
The Mac Lads.
Actually, where the Mac Lads were from, and in fact, the Mac Lads guitar player, who was beautifully named Phil McCavity, was my guitar teacher for a little while. He worked in Margin Music when he wasn't playing with the Mac Lads, and the Mac Lads were, for reference, a band that sang mostly obnoxious, misogynistic, and sexist songs that would probably fit in a Trump rally, but they were they were a big cult band.
They were naughty. They were a little bit naughty, weren't they, the Mac Lads?
I mean, they kind of were, but they were really a comedy act. Yeah, really, they had their own record shop in town. They really 90% of what they said was made up. And like I say, Phil was just a guitar teacher who happened to be good enough that they roped him in to get spat on a Saturday night. And
I was more of a Stone Roses fan.
Well, that was really my world, and also Joy Division were from Macclesfield, so that's our nearest thing to a claim to fame. I followed the Roses around, and like I said, I did this fanzine, and that led to various sort of bits and weird things like a national newspaper, the Daily Star, which was a tabloid, had a gossip column, and they wanted to rebrand it the rave column to capture the scene at the time. So they phoned me up and asked me to come and work there on some days off during my summer holidays. So I was going to the Daily Star, which was mainly literally a gossip column.
And you were a student at the time?
Yeah, I was a student. I was a student doing shifts, and I would phone up like PRs for various indie bands going, this is Tim. I'm calling from the Daily Star. I wanted to see if I could get a copy of the latest, Bell Tower CD. And they'd be like, why the fuck? It's somebody from the Daily Star calling us up about these things that are only in the NME. And my dream at the time, I think I wanted to be an NME journalist. I think I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be around bands. And I had a hunger to be, engaged in a scene where there was music, because I just found it all such an amazing ride. And I think because the sort of the Stone Roses, for example, it happened so fast, and it was such a rapid rise from small to this huge thing that, and I grew up on things like the Beatles and even U2. So I guess I thought that was normality, right? I thought that bands start, you discover them, and then they grow. And I think that when you and then after I went to university, and I was writing for I was a music editor for the university magazine, and I was running nightclubs and running Freshers Weeks and booking bands and in a band. Like, it was just, I didn't really have a plan. I just kind of threw myself at the culture that I was attracted to. So I never really knew what I was doing or why I was doing it, or that I expected to make any sort of career out of it. I think like I said, I wanted to write for the NME, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know whether that was a career or was it part-time. I just knew it's something I wanted to do.
What is the NME?
So the NME was the New Musical Express, and it was a weekly musical newspaper. It still has a web presence, but there used to be three. There used to be the Melody Maker and Sounds also, but they were weekly magazines that sold quite healthily.
Yeah, it was a lot of kudos for the bands to get in there.
Absolutely,
it was like, oh, you're in the NME. Oh, then you're legit.
Oh no, it was like Rolling Stone is the nearest that you kind of have here, but Rolling Stone is not as much of a music Bible as the NME was, and in fact, the NME was way more influential and going years back in each year they would have an awards ceremony, and very famously the Beatles played a lot of NME awards ceremonies that were running at Wembley at the time. So the NME was a very prestigious newspaper, really, about music, and the leading one in the world. And then I met people that worked there, and then really, truthfully, I'm not a very good writer, so that didn't really.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So
didn't really help me with that.
It was going so well.
It was going so well until the actual thing that you had to do there, I realised I was incapable of.
If only they had Chat GPT back in 1990. Yeah,
I'd have been a winner. But what actually happened was I ended up working for the local authority in Leeds, which is where I studied, and
that's where I was born. Is Leeds? That's my town.
Oh yes, well, I lived there for a number of years, and I worked for the council. And long story short, I worked on a project for the leader of the city council. It was called Leeds, a 24-hour city. And what we did, we tried to cut through red tape and encourage entrepreneurs to modernize the city. With pavement cafes, found ways to let people live in the city centre for the first time, because that had been a no-go area for a long time. To encourage it to be more bars than just old men drinking pubs. And we were also the first city in England to work out that you actually could open nightclubs on a Sunday night, got rid of this draconian law. And I did a publicity stunt where I took the chairwoman of licensing, who was like a 80-year-old Jewish granny, on a tour of all the nightclubs in Leeds, and invited some fashionable magazines, including the NME, and a load of people came, and it did pretty well, this stunt. And the next thing, a job came up at the NME, and it was to be assistant news editor, and I got down to the final two, and then the editor and the live editor at the time said, look, we think you're a better publicist than a writer, so you should probably be a publicist, and we'll introduce you to a publicist one day, which of course I just thought was a fob off, because they were clearly not giving me the job, and they were trying to let me down easy, because they knew I wanted to be there, because I'd done some work experience there and stuff. Anyway, a year later, I'd taken a job working as an entertainment manager at a university, booking bands for students that didn't want to hear the bands that I wanted to book. So it was really, really miserable. And this guy phoned me, said, look, my wife is a publicist and she wants to meet you. And I remember I thought, well, look, I never really envisaged being a publicist, but I always wanted to live in London, and it feels closer to music than I was booking the Wurzels and Umpar bands, which are the sort of things that I didn't want to book, They
had that great song, I Got a Combine Harvester.
Yeah, and Brilliant. Definitely didn't give me the key. And it was depressed. But anyway, I remember I did, instead of a CV, I wrote a press release about myself. And I had this meeting, and they took a chance on me. And despite me having very limited publicity experience, I ended up going to work as a publicist for a company in London called Coalition PR, which was run by a legend in PR, a guy called Rob Partridge, who had been a director of Island Records. So he had been Bob Marley's publicist. He'd been Tom Waits' publicist. He was the person who introduced U2 to Chris Blackwell, and Rob. Rob is a certifiable legend, and he took me under his wing. And it was difficult because I genuinely didn't know what I was doing. Like the first 3 weeks there, I remember they gave me like a sheet, a few sheets with some phone numbers of journalists on, and I would just spend the day looking at them, not knowing what to do. And we didn't really have necessarily a big music department at that time. We were doing a bit more. We were doing sort of other sort of cultural things. We did like manga. We did all of Island Records corporate stuff. We did the Mercury Music Prize, but the music department was small, and we only had a couple of artists. The Cocteau Twins was one called Moloko, it's Rasheen Murphy, and an artist called Gabrielle, who was had some big hits as a soul singer, which really wasn't the music that I came from, but I was so annoying and so enthusiastic that I just threw myself into the culture of music in London. I would go to every gig. I would, and I even before this, I read the NME, the Melody Maker, the sounds every week. I would literally tick off every song in the singles list, and so that I knew it. And I think when you're young, and I'm sure it's the same for you in both of your disciplines, when you're young and you're really invested in living that culture, it becomes very instinctive. So for me, walking into a room with bands that were close to my age, I was a big music fan. I'm a big music fan, but back then, I listened to everything, and I had a grounding in musical history just because I was a listener and a DJ, and I was really into this stuff. So I could sit in any room and speak to any band and get on their level, particularly as at the time that kind of 4-piece male-orientated British rock band was very en vogue, so that was my natural habitat, really. And then I think when you're doing publicity, it's quite a small aspect of a music industry campaign. So say if you've got an album campaign, you're almost an afterthought at times. And it's one of those things where if you get great press, it's never because of the press officer. If you get bad press, it's always because of the press officer. And also, I worked for an independent publicity company, which meant you got paid a monthly fee. And that fee would be the same whether you were working on a record that sold 5 million or sold 5 copies. So business-wise, it didn't make much sense to me. And I didn't like the distance from the artist, because you're sort of a bit on the outside. And also I didn't like having to be nice to journalists. I found that really difficult, or being nice about bands that I didn't like. I was really, 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 really transparent, that people could tell whether I was into it or not. It was all about enthusiasm. But I did win. Long story short, there was a big British band called the Verve who made a comeback around with an album called Urban Hymns. The first
one of the best albums of all time, I think. Excellent.
Well, that was my first big account. So they were looking for a new publicist, and Rob, for some reason, allowed me to pitch for it.
And they're another Manchester band, right?
Yeah, Wigan. And funnily enough, me and the singer, we both United fans. We've grown up going to the same gigs. We're about 4 weeks apart in age, and at the time, it was very simple for us to get on. And it was interesting because, they'd already had this big cult following, and they'd split up after an album called The Northern Soul. And then everyone knew they were getting back together, and they were one of my favorite bands anyway.
I wrote this. What made them get back together? Could you? Because I mean, I think that album was stunning, and I thought they were done, and they came back. What was?
Well, there were two different reformations. So after A Northern Soul, they split up because that album, which was the one before Urban Hymns, only sold like 30,000 copies. So I think they felt like it wasn't going anywhere, and they got a bit of a bum deal in the press. But that's actually probably my favorite record of theirs. And then Richard started writing Urban Hymns as a solo record, and eventually everybody realized it'd be much stronger if the band did it. And so they brought the band back together, which again, for me as a publicist, the thing I learned very quickly is it's all about angles. It's all about story. And in fact, I would say the same in any form of marketing. Like if you've got a brand that you're trying to launch, then it's all about the story of the brand. It's, obviously the brand itself has to be strong. Like it's all very well me having a great story, but if the record's crap, just more people are going to know that the record's crap, right? So but having a great story is the way to get people to write about the artist. People don't want to hear like, oh yeah, we went in the studio, recorded some songs. They need something to read about, to cling on to. You need a narrative. And we were good at that.
Did the Verve, were they a big band in America? I was in England.
They did. On Urban Hymns, obviously Bittersweet Symphony was a worldwide hit, and funnily enough, the first thing that happened was, we announced that was being released as a single. Then Andrew Loog Oldham and the Stones sued them for 100% of the song. So that was immediately. And actually, before that,
because the opening has got the Stones, the violin, hasn't it?
It's from an orchestral version of The Last Time that Andrew Loog Oldham did. Mm-hmm. So they get 100% of the songwriting on that. So the 100%
on Bittersweet Symphony.
Yeah, 100% of songwriting.
So the Verve's probably best known song they don't get anything for.
They'll get on the master side, but nothing on the songwriting side.
Unbelievable. Nothing. That's interesting. And so you were helping publicize that.
So I was the publicist for that record, and that led to the music industry is incredibly insecure. So it looks at something that's working and then thinks that there's some sort of magic ingredient. So suddenly, from being a person who literally couldn't get anyone to take their phone calls, I was a very popular publicist, and I brought in quite a few big clients. I was working on a lot of those bands like the Charlatans and Gomez, Placebo. I did Tom Jones, people like that, and then we grew and we kind of took over that kind of alt rock space. So we did things like the Strokes, Kings of Leon, Libertines, Franz Ferdinand. We built a really great thing. But what I will say, when you're talking about dream jobs, is what was magical that I had no idea of at the time, because it was my first sort of proper decent job, was I was around a bunch of people who were on the same journey as me at the same time, in a magical time where the music that I happened to listen to happened to be selling. Right? So there was an enormous amount of luck. I had a great mentor who allowed me to go and just do my thing, because I think he recognized the desire and the commitment that I had to music and to wanting to bring cool music into the company. But it became clear that I was getting bored of being a PR. I said I wanted to try management. And the thing about any record releases is that you have a lot of marketing meetings. So you'll all be sitting around the table with a full team. And I think when I first got there, I was terrified, because I'm thinking, oh my God, all these people got to London I'm a shit kicker from Macclesfield. Like, what the hell? And within a few weeks, I realized that most of them didn't know what the fuck they were doing either. So I was kind of naive and fearless. So I would just spout my opinions. And the thing that I've found, and I think that this is something, if you have an opinion and you can stand by it, people are really excited by that, because most people will avoid having an opinion or will go with a consensus rather than go, actually, no, this song's the one. No, this song's the one for this reason, and this reason. And I think with music, I think it's a young person's game, because I think that when you are living culture, you are far more attuned with how audiences are going to receive certain music, which audiences are going to receive it, and how you reach those audiences. So I think at that moment in my career, it was easy for me to be somewhat brave. And as I say, it was the right place, right time. And then, so we started a management company, and the first band that we found actually came from, it was a friend of the guitar player from the Verves, and he's like, my mate's got a band, help him out. And I was like, of course, you're my biggest client. And then it turned out they were really good, and we got them signed to Island Records, and we definitely made some mistakes because it was my first role as a manager. And Rob, despite being enormously respected as a publicist and as a director of Island Records, he hadn't specifically been a manager before. What we had done, though, is sit in all of these marketing meetings and get a great deal of understanding about what a manager really does, and spent a lot of time dealing directly with managers. So we did that. And then, funnily enough, I was asked by Leeds City Council, because I'd worked for them, to go up and judge a talent competition that they were having in the Town and Country Club in Leeds. And I went up, and I was one of 4 judges. And all of the bands, they were either playing covers or they were copying whatever was going on at the time. But at the end of it, this young, scruffy bunch of skinheads walk on stage and start making this ungodly racket, and then the singer starts singing this incredible, like, scat vocal, but totally unique and totally like nothing that had come before it. And I remember calling Rob afterwards and saying, I think I've got the band now. I think I've got the band. And they were at the time, they were called Incense, and we changed their name to The Music, which was not necessarily the smartest thing given Google searches, but they actually went on to do pretty well, massive in Japan. They got signed to Capitol Records in the US, so I started spending a lot of time in LA. Signed to Virgin in the UK, and they toured the world multiple times, but they were only 16. And so we learned a lot of tough lessons through them too. And then from there, ultimately, I didn't really have a plan. I didn't want to be the chairman of Universal. I didn't want to run like the biggest management company in the world. I guess I wanted to find the Beatles, and I guess I never really thought about money, but I always assumed that, I suppose, that if you managed the Beatles or Springsteen, you'd get rich anyway. So, but that had to be a byproduct of greatness, and it can't be the other way around. And so always my focus was finding things that I loved, I could advocate for, and I wanted to work on. And I think, again, very much right place, right time. That the sort of music that I was into was selling at the time. It was just post Britpop, so there was a lot of money sloshing around in the sort of alternative music area. And I think, for context, we were basically selling bits of plastic to the shops for £6. So every CD we would sell it in at £6, and that £6 would get split between the rest of us, and then the shop would put on their profit margin on top of that. So for every album that sold, that was a £6 to be split between all the stakeholders. That's incomparable to now, where like 12 plays of an album is less than a penny. Gosh. So it was a completely different. Recording music was a completely different prospect. I could find a band and say that we were managing them, and as long as they were vaguely talented, I would have offers coming out of my ears from labels for 100, 150 grand. And then what you would do is you would use that money to run the band's business for 2 years. You wouldn't spend it. We were quite professional and sensible managers. We'd make sure that tax was put aside. We'd build a team around them. We'd find them the right home. We'd find them the right publicist, and the right routes. And one thing I will say about music at that time, aside from you selling pieces of plastic, which was much more profitable on the recorded side, also it was far easier to reach an audience. So, for example, we talked earlier about the New Musical Express, but then also, this sort of music was getting played on the radio, and then there was things like MTV. So you ultimately had to hit 3 different touch points. And if you hit those 3 touch points with a band, you were well on your way. Now it's incredibly difficult because those touch points don't exist. Music, television, not just MTV, but there's no shows for TV in the UK or the US. Nobody sells records by being on Saturday Night Live. Nobody sells records by being on David Letterman or whatever those late night shows are anymore. You do that to tick a box. Don't get me wrong, it all adds up and it all adds to profile, but you don't, it doesn't, there's no specifically easy route, as I believe there was, especially in a small country like the UK back in those days. America's always been notoriously difficult. It's so broad, and you have to go literally state by state. Mm-hmm. But right. The UK was a lot easier to navigate, and we were very lucky to get through that door. And I, by sort of accident, managed to build a sort of small boutique agency. As I say, the music industry, success tends to beget success. So we got offered lots of other sort of alternative bands. And then the next one I picked up was an artist called The Streets, who's a British rapper, a seminal British rapper, and who made one of the most important rap records in British history, original pirate material. And then his second album, A Grand Don't Come for Free, was one of the biggest albums in the UK in 2004, I think. Won Brit Awards and was number one, had a number one single, so, but for a very alternative white rapper, which was very unusual at the time, it was incredibly groundbreaking, but also, quite the roller coaster of a ride. And then at the same time, I also picked up a band called the Zootons, who were from Liverpool, and their first album did really well, and their second album had a song on called Valerie that was covered by Amy Winehouse to an enormous effect, and has become her biggest song and probably one of the most lucrative songs of the last sort of 30 years. So those 3 were the core of what I did. And then I started working, as I mentioned, with Dexy's Midnight Runners because they were heroes of mine. And then I built out a couple of extra managers, and we ended up managing people like Block Party and Phoenix, and a few other alternative bands. So for a while in the 2010s, in the 2000s, really, we were probably the preeminent alternative management company. But there was only 5 of us, and, we were winning awards and bits. But if I'm honest, the the industry side never sat that easily with me. When we did win Manager of the Year award, I didn't turn up, and when Mike won his Brit Awards, the Streets won his Brit Award, what we did, he performed, and then we had an elaborate getaway, so he didn't even have to pick his trophy up. So we had a getaway car, and what actually happened was he came off stage. We ran to the dressing room. Me and him, I was a lot slimmer at the time. We swapped shirts. Then I ran and locked myself in the bathroom. The producers followed me because they knew we were up to something. They thought that I was him. So I sat in the bathroom on my phone for like 20 minutes, waited for the getaway car to be clear. And then as I walked out of the bathroom, the producers saw me, and the language was industrial, to say the least. So
he didn't want to get his award.
No. I
love that. I wish someone would do that at the Oscars. Where is he? Yeah, he buggered off.
We only went to perform the song. We performed the song because we wanted the coverage for the song, and then the rest of it, we never bothered with that stuff. And I've never been very good at that. I've never been the best at networking. And, and I would say that hasn't necessarily made survival very easy when you're talking about surviving. I would say that if you're able to do that, you can stay on top of things a lot better. And I always had this kind of pipe dream of letting my work speak for itself. But obviously, I think, music goes through periods, and it definitely changed towards the end of the 2000s, and sort of electronic dance music became much more prominent. The stuff that I was managing, people were either splitting up or they had enough. And then Rob, my mentor, got cancer and had a long battle and passed away, and I lost all of my motivation. And I came to America. I took my soccer coaching badges. I wanted to coach football to kids, and I wanted to try and write TV shows, which I started on for a bit. But you can actually write, which helps. So and there was no AI back then. So I didn't mean that glibly. I know it's a serious thing, but so I was out really. I wasn't necessarily cut out for the sycophancy part of it, or especially, and once I moved to LA, Los Angeles is a city where if you're not useful to people, you're kind of invisible. And I discovered that most of the people that I'd thought that I had working relationships with, didn't know how to pick my phone calls up on a social level once I moved here, which was a harsh thing to learn. But then, as I say, we adopted my daughter, and there's a long story behind that, but I needed to get a job. So I took a job working for Duran Duran's management, which was not because of them, but from running a successful company to going in on a vaguely junior level, working for somebody else was tough at first. And bless Duran Duran, like, not my sort of music, great songs and everything. And it was comedy sometimes. Like, I drive a Mini, and I'd have to go and pick up John Taylor, who's incredibly tall, I think he's moved back to England too now, but he lived up on Outpost, and in this massive house because his wife sold Juicy Couture, so she's even more loaded than he is. So
really?
No. They'd gone clear, but I would have to drive him around meetings in LA, and he's massive. He'd be crammed into my Mini with me driving him around. And actually, Simon the Bond said to me one day, "You don't really like our music, do you, mate?" And I was like, "Well, it just wasn't necessarily what I was listening to going about." Yes, it's all right. I knew that. I could tell you were a little mod, weren't you? And I'd say, yeah, I was a mod. Yeah, I was a mod. So it was, but you know,
and he was good with it though. But what I like about that,
totally,
yeah.
No,
but it seems like being
adults.
An enthusiast and being authentic has like served you well in the circuitous path that you have taken. Like, what was the timeline between when you were like 16 and you started writing and the day that you were like, actually, I think I want to be a manager? Like, how many years were in between that?
I reckon I would have been 28, so probably 12 years. And even then, I think the management thing, it was just because I just wanted to be nearer the band. Like, I hated the only time that I got to see the band was backstage at a gig, and the only input I'd ever have would be in the planning meeting. And you know, I wanted to be so much closer to that journey. It's as close as you can be to being in the band, but having no talent. You know,
did you ever want to be in a band?
Oh, absolutely. And so when I was at college, I was in a band, and it was my band, right? And I was the leader of the band, and I was the songwriter and all of this stuff. And then, you know, it was obviously because I was an idiot, there was a great turnover of musicians that couldn't stand being around me. But there was one point where we had this friend, Tom, who used to paint all of our front rooms. Like, he was an amazing artist. And bass player left, and Tom turned around to me and said, "Oh, I'll play bass." I'm like, you're not a musician. Painter. What do you know about music? He said, "Oh, I'll just pick it up. Don't worry, I'll pick it up." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, whatever." So we had this rehearsal. He comes round to my house, and because I took myself so seriously, so we've all got to play acoustic level so we can all hear each other, you can hear the beauty of my songwriting. And so I said, "Right, here, Tom, give me the bass, and I'll show you what to play on the bass." And he says, "Well, give me your guitar, and I'll strum your chords." And I'm like, "You can't strum my chords. I'll just bar chord them. Can't be that hard, can you?" I said, "Well, these are the chords." Anyway, he starts playing my chords on bar chords. It sounded 10,000 times better than anything I'd ever done. And it was at that moment specifically was really profound, and I realized I had zero musical talent. And there was a difference between people that have a gift and that people didn't. Tom actually went on to win the Guinness Prize for Art and married Harriet Guinness, who is one of the heirs to the Guinness, as in the drink Guinness. Yeah, so he was a legit artist. But the point is, it really did. I never really wanted to do. If I wanted to be in a band, I wanted to be in the Beatles. I didn't want to be in the Wonder stuff. You know, I didn't want to be like a sort of average plodding band. If I wanted to be in a band, I wanted to go after greatness, and that clearly wasn't going to happen for me. So I didn't know. After I realized I wasn't going to be in the band, I think the NME thing came along, and I think the management thing came as a natural consequence of sitting in all those meetings, realizing that most managers were idiots, and that maybe I could get away with it. That was the.
So are you living the dream now, helping them live their dreams, being a part of it?
Well, my old clients, the Zootons in the Streets, came back when I started working with Wendy, the Duran Duran company. And then I kind of have gone off my own way again now, and I'm partnered with a different company now, 360, who are a huge worldwide company. They do like Calvin Harris and Will Smith, Frank Ocean, they're all sorts. So they're a superstar management company, and I'm like the small indie corner. Like I think they tolerate because of something that I did 25 years ago. But I don't know, like. It's different. I think music is a young person's game. I think that like it's changed immeasurably. Like the delivery methods have changed, the route to market has changed, the career has changed. What I would say is that you do learn is it's a very harsh industry. And so most of my clients went through enormous highs and then enormous lows. And the PTSD from that on all of us is immense. Like I would find it hard to, if somebody said to me their kid wants to be in music, I'd be really hard pushed to persuade them to do it unless I thought they were, number one, truly exceptional, but beyond that, exceptional drive and built with the sort of the toughness that you need. You look at somebody like Chapel Roan, that young lady, took her 10 years of rejection to reach this point. Charlie XCX is the same thing. She went through many. You have to be incredibly resilient. You have to be able to take defeat. And the truth is, talent is probably 10%. The same as sport, right? Yeah. 90% of it is being willing to work harder than everybody else. They're the people that are going to succeed. And the way that has changed now is, like back in my day, like the Verve, for example, they wouldn't have done social media. The Verve would have they would have made great records, great art, and that's all that we did. We stopped doing interviews. Like we did barely any interviews. We were all about mystique. You cannot do that now. If you want to be a successful musician, you've got to be a broadcaster, and you've got to even if I wanted to make a demo when I was at university, you'd have to find a recording studio, somebody who could record it. They'd have to put it onto a cassette. You'd have to make copies of that cassette, and that's just for a demo. Now I could record a song on my phone and have it out tomorrow. How do we work between what's worth hearing and what isn't? The major labels don't have a clue what they're doing. They're guessing. The people that are getting through are the ones that have managed to create their authentic voices. And I think, again, desire and vision are as important as talent. I look at Doechii, who is obviously very much on vogue at the moment, and deservedly so. If you look at what she does, 4 years ago, she lost her job. She started broadcasting from her bed, and she worked out what it was she wanted to do. She choreographs, she makes her videos, she has overriding vision for every single part of her project, and everything goes into it, and that makes her stand aside. But it's much harder to make money now. It's much harder to survive. There's no shortcuts, and you've got to do things that musicians generally haven't been comfortable with in becoming a broadcaster on social media. But I would say the flip side of that is that in the past, as a musician, there was always somebody in between you and your perception to the rest of the world. Now you get to craft your own perception completely.
We've come to the end of the podcast. I know we've taken a lot of your time up here, Tim. So
I'm sorry, I've just
no, it's great. I actually think like they should do a remake of The Chauffeur with Duran Duran and have you rather than the sexy ladies dancing for that video. But
they need a wide-angled lens.
I have one last question before we get to our regular questions. What would 16-year-old you think of where you've wound up?
Honestly, a bit disappointed. A bit disappointed in some of the decisions that I made. A bit disappointed that I didn't necessarily able to stay as engaged and excited as I have been in the past, and I didn't find the Beatles. So I think I've achieved way more than I ever thought I was capable of achieving. But then, having seen the opportunities that I found myself in, I think I should have probably made more of them.
Youth. We never know what we're doing when we're there.
Yeah. The stream's so much wider.
Okay, let's move to the regular questions. Tim, I want to know, what would you do if you won the lottery?
So I would definitely want a home on the beach and a home in London. Those two things would be really important. So then I could carry on doing the things that I do with my work, but, in a lot more comfort. So that would be number one, along with a private jet. But what I'd also really like to do, and this is something that that I think more people with money should do, is the things that I love, like music and sport, are really about young people and them having opportunity. So what I would love to do is be able to run like a leisure centre in of my own, where I could run football teams, volleyball teams, basketball teams, but also spaces for musicians to rehearse and put music together in I don't want to say inner city areas, but in areas where, there was a big thing recently. I think it was a musician called Sam Fender from the UK. You talked about the barriers for entry into the music business for kids that aren't loaded, basically. And that's definitely been something that I've seen. It's very difficult for people to survive. So I'd love to be able to do something like that, because my experience has been that, if you can find young, motivated people, and if you think about so many of the best bands that we've loved, they've been from people who've needed to get out from places, but especially in the way that music is now, you need a bit more time for that. So I'd love to couple that with my love of working with sport and have some sort of youth centre, probably one in Manchester, probably one in the Valley, where people can go, make music and play sports. I think if I had enough money to build those sort of things, that would be something that I'd find really, really, really enjoyable to do with the rest of my career, whilst busking through the clients that I have now, but in a lot more comfort.
Thanks, you, Tim. From the Pennines to the St. Gabriel's Valley. Wonderful. Got it.
What is your go-to snack or comfort food? All those ups and downs, what was getting you through?
Do you know what? Like, I can go from one extreme to the other. I order in a British drink called Tizer, which is a soda. A soda's my worst habit, but I also really love nice sushi. So I can go either way. I can go either sushi and whenever I'm in England, it's Nando's.
Oh yeah,
that's the chicken place, right?
Yeah, peri chicken, peri chicken. But those are my definite two things: soda, sushi, and Nando's. So.
And what's your favourite animal and why?
Well, we grew up with cats, and I love cats because they're mellow, and the only reason we don't have them is because, I get scared of them being eaten and stuff like that by coyotes and all that sort of stuff. And but I definitely cats. Yes, cats are the lowest maintenance, and I kind of like to hope that I could be low maintenance. Maybe I can come back as a cat.
Yeah, you're playing to the right audience here.
Yeah, right. For sure. Although my cats are not low maintenance, they're very spoiled. Okay, Tim, if we really knew you, what would we know about you?
Oh, I play a lot of video games. I play one video game. I play FIFA, which is a a soccer-based video game. That's some people play golf, and I used to like playing poker, but there's that. I think what you know about me the most is that the enthusiast in me is never gone. It just goes to different things at different times. There's been boxing periods. There's been, like I say, back into gaming. And whenever I'm into something, I go in so deep that I end up having a fountain of useless knowledge, and then I move on to something else very quickly. So I think that you know, for example, with my daughter, she decided she wanted to play volleyball, which I knew nothing about, and now I coach her team. So that gives you some insight into the obsessive enthusiast that I can
Not
be.
a half committer. I like it.
No.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Yeah, you are a survivor. You know, good luck with Manchester United. Good luck with everything you're doing. Good luck with your daughter's life.
Thanks for filling my iPod for so many years. And I'm going to say iPod because that's what it was back then.
Wow.
Thanks for being
hopefully
here.
More to come. Very, very nice to see you all.
Look forward to it.
See you soon.
Thank you. Bye,
Tim.
everybody.
Bye.
Quick shout out to Mike Nicholas for being our tech savior, and Carmen Sclafani, also known as Wiser Time. Thanks for our music. And thank you all for listening.